because whenever you're getting tired, you're not retaining information and you just get frustrated and you keep trying, it's just not going to work. So take some time for yourself. Be generous, be gracious to yourself, be merciful to yourself, because you're going to need it. It's very challenging to try to manage the workload, but you also have to have some semblance of a normal life. Like, right, you have to eat, you have to drink, you have to spend some time with other people apart from your textbooks. That's just part of life. And you have to be willing to take time for yourself.
Hello, future CRNA. Welcome to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I have a very special episode lined up for you today, and it is part of our guest host series where I am bringing current SRNAs on the show for you as a guest host on the CSBA podcast. And my thought process behind doing this is I wanted you to hear from current students, a variety of current students who are at different stages of their CRNA journey, and really allow you to kind of step into their world and hear them talk about what it's like to be a current student dealing with things like difficult preceptors or different anesthesia topics, clinical topics, maybe even things like time management, stress management, things like that. I think these episodes are going to be gold, and I hope you enjoy as much as I always do hearing from current students. I know for a fact that the reason why CRNA School Prep Academy is where it is today, and the reason why I have learned so much, is from diving all in, listening to current students along with CRNAs share a wealth of information, and really kind of taking all of that information and kind of compiling it into kind of the system that we have created today. And I know that you're doing the same thing by tuning into the show week after week, developing your own method, your own strategy, and your own system for success. So I hope you enjoy these guest episodes. Let's go ahead and get into today's show.
Welcome to the CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your guest host, David Warren, and today we are talking about what I wish I had known prior to starting CRNA School, the didactic version. So I did a clinical version previously. If you haven't listened to that, check that out. Today, we're talking about what I wish I had known prior to CRNA School in the didactic phase. Those of you who are new here, thank you so much for joining in and listening. And for you repeat visitors, welcome back. Thank you also for being here and for listening. For those of you who don't know me as a CRNA School Prep Academy guest host, my background is in emergency medicine as a nurse practitioner for about 8 years. Today, we're diving right into what I wish I had known prior to CRNA School didactic version. So I am in a front-loaded DNAP program out on the West Coast. I am starting my second clinical rotation. So I finished all the didactic component. I did that for about 15 months out on the West Coast. And since then, I've started my clinical journey. I'm currently in my second clinical rotation right now. All of my didactic content was presented up front. So I learned everything CRNA textbook related in the first 15 months, had all of my exams, learned everything across the lifespan, and am now putting that into practice in my clinical rotations. So there are some programs that are integrated, meaning you do some didactic and some clinical at the same time. There are some programs who say they're front loaded and you take all of your didactic components, up front to learn about the textbook anesthesia stuff. And then when you're in clinical, there are still some didactic classes that you have to take that are anesthesia related. So just to clarify that, my program was fully front-loaded, meaning I did all of the textbook anesthesia content up front. I don't have any didactic stuff left. In addition to my clinical course, we're also doing a DNAP course and like some Apex board review stuff. But all of the material that we are reviewing in Apex, we've actually already learned, and it's just a review. And so I kind of want to make that distinction. This is what I wish I had known prior to starting CRNA School day one. I have 4 points for you here. My first point is probably the most important. These are, after this first point, they are they're not ranked in order of importance, but this first point definitely is probably the most important point that I wish I had known. And that is, I wish I had, prior to CRNA School, I wish I had developed good study habits. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So my background is in emergency medicine as a nurse practitioner, which looks wildly different than probably most anybody else applying to CRNA School. There are probably a few other people who have that background. as a nurse practitioner in some area, but it's the rare occurrence. It's not the norm. And so I have a master's degree as a nurse practitioner. I've taken graduate level courses, and I still wish I had developed better study habits prior to starting CRNA school, because I'll give you my story. I'll kind of give you what I did and how I wish it had been better for me. So when I started CRNA school, I really didn't fully know what I was getting myself into. And I don't think anybody does. I think you can sit here and listen to this all day long. You can read forums, you can read blogs, people can tell you, but until you experience that yourself, you truly don't know what you're getting yourself into and what the level of detail will be until you reach that point. And then you're like, okay, everybody has this like come home moment, and they're like, okay, this is what everybody was talking about. And I had that realization as well. So whenever I started CRNA school, I thought I had good study habits. I thought I was good to go. And then when CRNA school hit, it's truly like all the amount of material that you could ever imagine coming at you at one time. And so even compared to my nurse practitioner program, so I'm a family nurse practitioner and an acute care nurse practitioner. I was in a dual combined program. And so even compared to that, the material was still very intense. And that's not to negate that the nurse practitioner curriculums are not as intense, because I felt that that was very intense as well. However, just from a different perspective, the anesthesia content was much more intense and much more in depth. And I wish I had developed good study habits prior to entering that phase of the program, the didactic phase. I really wish I had sorted out, and I really wish I had known what works for me and what doesn't work for me, because I will tell you the hard way, what doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me to sit there and to listen to lectures and to read over notes over and over and over again. That doesn't work for me. And I knew that part going in. When I was in nursing school and when I was in my NP program, what did work for me was making flashcards. And so I would write things on flashcards and I would just study that way, handwrite everything out. And I quickly learned that in CRNA school, that works a little bit, but it doesn't work fully, because you truly don't have the time to write out everything you need on a note card, and then, to do that for every class you have. You would literally spend all of your time preparing to study and none of your time actually studying. And that's kind of the scenario that I ran into. Is I would spend so much time preparing to study. I would review my notes, I would make my note cards, and then by the time I was actually ready to start learning the material, the test was already like next day, and that just didn't work. And so I knew, month one, I've got to find something different. And I wish I had taken that step months before I entered CRNA school, months before I even applied to CRNA school. It would have been handy to know what works for me and what doesn't work for you, or what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And you need to be asking yourself that as well. If you're applying to CRNA school, if you've gotten into CRNA school and you're getting ready to start, put this at the very top of your list. What works for you and what doesn't work for you as far as studying? And that's a question that really only you can answer, because some people there's some people in my program who read their notes and don't do anything else. They just read over and over and they ace the test. That doesn't work for me for whatever reason. My brain's just not built that way. I can read something over and over, but just reading something doesn't cut it for me. And I wish I had known that going in. And so I kind of learned the hard way. Like, I would make these note cards and I would realize I'm out of time. I don't know what to do. And there's a book that I want you to go read that really changed my life and changed the way I study, especially for anesthesia school. And the book is called Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. Make it stick. So I would encourage you to go download that book, go read that book. It really goes into evidence-based learning processes. And so it's very interesting and it really clicked for me, because we use evidence-based practice as clinicians in really every facet of our clinical lives. We use evidence-based practice to help take care of patients. We use evidence-based practice in anesthesia. I used evidence-based practice in emergency medicine. And some of you are probably on committees that deal with evidence-based practice. And so this book really goes into the evidence of learning and what works and what doesn't work. And it's super, super interesting. And I'm not going to spoil the whole book for you, but the main point of the book is that active recall is the best way for you to retain information, backed by science, backed by evidence. Active recall. If you don't know what active recall is, you should go go on a little rabbit hole and look up what active recall is. I'll give you the short version here. So active recall is when you are able to do just that. You are able to actively recall what you have learned. And so it goes far beyond just reading notes and saying, okay, I need to know X, Y, and Z. I got to know this drug and I got to know these side effects. It really goes far beyond that. And the best way that I found for me to do this was to read over my notes, and I would make practice questions, open-ended practice questions about whatever was on that PowerPoint slide. And I would recite those questions to myself, and I would read those questions over and over, read the notes over and over until I could answer those questions without looking at my notes. And so it would be an open-ended question about whatever was on that PowerPoint, or multiple open-ended questions about whatever was on that PowerPoint or note slide, whatever it was that I was trying to study. I would make open-ended questions so that I would have to dig that information out of my brain and actively recall what I had learned. And that changed the game for me. I plan to do an episode on how I studied in CRNA school. So I'm not going to give you all the details on that. There's much more detail that I want to go into. But that's the basis of my first point is know your study habits and read the book, make it stick, because and preferably do it before you start CRNA school, because you will learn the evidence of successful learning. And it's super interesting to read evidence-based practice when it comes to learning. And so I encourage you to do that. And I encourage you, if you're applying to CRNA school, take a deep dive on what it means for you to study and how you retain content and the best ways for you to go about doing that. So that's my first point. What I wish I had known, I wish I had developed good study habits prior to entering CRNA school. Okay, on to my second point. Point number 2. And these are just kind of all over the board. They're not really in any particular order, like I said earlier, and they don't really go together. So we're just going to kind of be jumping all over the board here. So point number 2, know your expenses. Know your expenses. And these are things that, because I'm a planner. And so I really feel like I had everything planned out and ready to go, before I started CRNA school. But little did I know, there were things that I wish I had known. And one of those things was expenses. Know your expenses. So I am originally from Texas, and I moved states away to the West Coast to attend CRNA school. And so as you can imagine, as you can surmise, probably like some of you who are listening, there are going to be expenses associated with your CRNA school journey, just like there are with anyone's. You need to know what those expenses are, especially now in the day and age of where we apply to CRNA school, and sometimes we're waiting up to a year before we actually start the program. Use whatever amount of time you have, or even use time before you apply to CRNA school to practice your budget. Know what your expenses are going to be. If you're moving states away to Oregon, to Washington, to Massachusetts, wherever you're moving to, know what those expenses will be. Know what your actual expenses of just moving, driving to the place, catch the plane, whatever you're going to do. Know what those moving expenses will be, and know what your housing situation is going to be. Are you going to be living with somebody? Are you going to be living alone? Are you going to be eating out a lot? Are you going to be cooking? Know what your expenses are. And the best way to do that is to just trial it, practice it while you're out of school. And that's something I wish I had done, because I didn't really do that. I knew what my expenses would be, but I kind of overestimated some things and underestimated some things. And I feel like I came to a relatively good conclusion, but I probably undershot things a little bit because I didn't actually implement my budget before starting CRNA school. And that's something I wish I would have done. I wish I had lived like I was going to be in school for, if not a year, maybe a few months, 6 months, 5 or 6 months, and get that budget down to know what your expenses are going to be, your monthly expenses. Are you paying for health insurance? Are you paying for your life insurance? Are you paying for dental insurance? Are you paying a car payment? There's all these things that just add up. And, when you're working, it's not that big of a deal because you've got a stream of income coming in. But when you're not working, that adds up really quick, especially if you haven't allotted the time or the resources for that. So biggest thing you can do is, apart from knowing your study habits, is know your expenses, know where you want to go to school. And obviously this can change, right? Because if you're applying to multiple different schools across different states, it's going to change a little bit. And that's ultimately going to change depending on where you go to school. And so if you know where you're going to go to school, you know what area you're going to be in, try to, as much as you can, research that and budget for those expenses and those things that you're going to be having to take care of while you're in school. And this point was more geared towards life and the things that come with life, not necessarily the school expenses. That's a whole nother topic. School expenses, while we're here, we'll touch on that as well. Obviously, know your tuition. How are you going to pay for your tuition? Are you taking loans out? Are you taking the Grad Plus loan? Are you taking private loans? What's your plan for paying for school? And if you're thinking, oh, I'm just going to, worry about that whenever I get accepted, don't do that. Don't take the step now. Find out what your expenses are going to be and how you're going to budget for that. What loans you plan to take? Research the interest rates on those loans. Are you taking government loans? If so, those interest rates are fixed. Are you going to be taking private money from a family member? Probably not the best idea, but are you going to be borrowing that money and then planning to pay it back? Or is somebody paying your way through CRNA school? If that's the case, it's probably not a huge deal for you, but you should definitely think about those school-related expenses as well. And I'll give you an example from my program. We had to purchase an ultrasound machine, a butterfly ultrasound machine, prior to starting the program, or when we started the program, and it was around $3,000. And it was to help, for us to take home and to use. We had assignments with it to visualize anatomy for ultrasound guided regional anesthesia, for doing a FAST exam, for doing a bedside cardiac exam, all of those things. And so that was a huge expense. $3,000 is a lot of money. It may not be that much money if you're working and you've got thousands of dollars coming in every month. But if you're not working and you're not in school, that's a big expense. And so find out from your school. It's a good thing to ask in your interview. What expenses are there in addition to tuition that I would be responsible for? And so I'll give you some more examples. We have to buy Apex Anesthesia, which is a board review program. We have to buy Prodigy Anesthesia, which is another board review program. Those are several $100s each. And so these expenses just kind of keep stacking on and adding up. And that's just part of it. And so during your interview, you need to ask some of those questions. What other expenses am I going to be responsible for, in addition to obviously tuition? And so also find out in your clinical, this is more geared towards didactic, but school as a whole, find out clinical wise, are you going to be doing rotations in different states? Are you going to be staying in the same area? Is housing provided for you? Do you have to find your own housing? All of those things that you don't think about until the time comes. And that's why I'm telling you now. So think about these things before the time rolls around, because you'll be really glad you did. Overall, big picture, know your expenses. Also have a reserve fund. So even if it's just a few $1,000s or several $100s, have some sort of reserve fund in case something goes wrong. Your car breaks down, you need a new tire, you need a new battery, whatever it is, have some sort of reserve fund set aside. So if something does go wrong, not necessarily with your car, but really with anything, a family member dies and you have to catch a flight back home the next day, have something set aside so you have a little bit of extra money on hand. And that's definitely something that is worthwhile to think about, especially before you start your CRNA school journey.
Well, hello, future CRNA. I wanted to share another daily dose of inspiration from a highlight from our community. This big shout out goes to Taylor. Congratulations on your CRNA acceptance. Thank you so very much for sharing your story. I was accepted into program. Again, I don't disclose that. I wanted to thank the Academy for all the resources in this community, for the support and advice. They specifically asked me about being a member of CRNA School Prep Academy in my interview and asked how I think it benefited me. This was my first year applying, and I only applied to 2 schools. I got interviews at both. I believe this program really put me ahead of other candidates and showed my determination and growth. Thank you. Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate those sweet words and your testimonial, as well as your story. It's so inspiring, and I'm so incredibly grateful to have you be a part of our community. Cheers to your future. I'm rooting for you. Let's go ahead and get back into today's show.
So the third point, know your peers and faculty. Know your peers and faculty. And what I mean by that is really you're going to be spending 3 years as well, now that everything's doctoral, you're going to be spending 3 years, if not more, with the people that you're surrounded with, your peers, your colleagues in your cohort, and your faculty. So I will address faculty first. And so you can kind of get a good idea of your faculty when you do your interview. And the interview is obviously a good time for the faculty to interview you and to find out if you're a good fit for their program, but it's also a good time for you to get in touch with and talk to and kind of get an idea of the faculty. And is that faculty, that the panel of people that you're interviewing with, are they going to be a good fit for you as well? Do they have your back? Are they easy to get along with? Are they difficult personalities? There can be difficult personalities in the anesthesia realm, and that's just part of it. But maybe you just don't jive with some of the people in the faculty. And the reality is you're going to be spending 3 years with these people. They're going to be teaching you your anesthesia courses. They're going to be in your simulation labs. They're going to be doing your oral boards if you have oral boards. They're going to be administering your exams. They're going to be assigning you clinical rotations, and they're going to be mentoring you during your doctoral work. And so you really need to know, are these faculty members a good fit for me? And that's really only something you can answer, because people that are a good fit for me may not be a good fit for you. And so the interview is a really good time for you to know, are these faculty members going to have my back? And are they somebodies that I can spend 3 years with and not want to completely like pull my hair out? And so you're not going to get a great sense of that in the interview, but at least you're talking, you're having a conversation with people, and you can get a general sense of the faculty and if that's something you can deal with or not. Now, whenever you're accepted and whenever you start CRNA school, be cordial. Don't do anything crazy to your detriment as far as your relationships with your faculty. Don't go badmouth your faculty on social media and they find out about it, and it's just spirals downhill from there. And these are things that they're just like, well, duh, like I wouldn't do that. But you'd be surprised. Like, have a good relationship with your faculty, because they're there to help you, but you also are going to have to spend 3 years with them. So find out in your interview, if you can, are they somebody that I can jive with? And then if you do decide, yes, I think I can live with these people. Obviously, I want to go to CRNA school. I'm in CRNA school. I'm going to accept the offer. Whenever you do accept your offer, just know when you start, have a good relationship with your faculty. They accepted you because they believe in you. They think that you can succeed in their program, and keep that dynamic alive, because you don't want to put that dynamic on in like a weird way. You don't want to say things or do things that would jeopardize your relationship with your faculty members, because they obviously, whenever they accept you into their program, they see you as somebody who can be successful. And don't prove them wrong. Don't prove them wrong. You want to have that good relationship with your faculty members, because again, you're going to be with them for 3 years. And this is something that's kind of hard to do initially, right? Whenever you're applying to CRNA school, you don't really get to know somebody by like a 50-minute interview. You can get to know a little bit, but you can't know a whole lot. And so whenever you do accept that offer of admission, just know there are probably going to be people that you don't like as faculty in your program, like some people that you just don't get along with, and that's fine. But do your best to get along with those people, because it's going to be the same in the workplace, right? When you go to clinical, when you have preceptors, when you're a CRNA, there are going to be people you just don't like working with. And that's part of the reality of life, really. They're just people that you just don't jive with. But you have to have that professional relationship, and you have to treat them with respect and dignity, just like they will for you. The other part of that is know your peers, because, and this is hard to do because it's not really something you can do prior to CRNA school, because other students are interviewing for those slots just like you are. And whenever that cohort is set, that class is set, like you're going to start with these people no matter if you like them or not. I will say, get off on a good foot with your peers, with your other cohort members in your CRNA school. Like, don't be the loner who just stays home and never does anything. Like, get to know your peers, know them. You'll get to know them certainly from school, but get to know them in more of a social setting as well. Go out, have fun, take a day off, get to know these people, because you are going to be spending 3 years alongside of these people. And you don't want to have people, especially whenever you start in the clinical setting, you're really relying on each other. I'll give you an example. Today at my clinical setting, there's another student there, and I was like pulling meds for my case, and we were going down the hall, back to my room, and I like go and did my case and, finish up the case. And I'm like taking my patient to PACU, and the student was like, "Hey, do you want me to grab your meds for the next case for you?" And I was like, sure, that would be amazing. Like, grab the meds, like I'll meet you in there, like finish getting set up. And so having that good relationship of somebody that and that you trust helps a lot, because if you're that loner and nobody likes you and you're mean to people, like people are going to help you whenever you're in the clinical setting. Like they're going to help you, they're going to go pull meds for you and get your room set up for you if you're slammed busy. So know your peers as well. Like treat them with respect, know them, because you're going to be spending 3 years with them as well. So I would say you have more of a chance to get to know your faculty during your interview, to know, hey, is this going to work or not? But whenever you are accepted, you accept your offer of admission and you start your program, get to know your peers as well, because you're spending 3 years with them. Get off on a good foot and make it work, because you're going to be stuck with them for 3 years as well. Okay, my last point is probably, I said the number one point was most important. So what develop study habits, like I said, that's very important. However, the last point here is probably just as important. And that is take time for yourself. Take time for yourself. It is very easy. I'm speaking from 100% experience here. It's very easy to get into CRNA school and to just get slammed with everything that's going on, right? You're studying, like I was studying in my didactic phase, I was studying at least 7 to 10 hours per day on average. Now, I would take weekends off. I would usually take Saturday, Sunday off. Sometimes I would review on like Saturday or Sunday for a few hours, but usually I would take Saturday, Sunday off. And sometimes I would take a day off in the week. But for the most part, I was studying like 7 to 10 hours a day, just hammering it out. And that's very normal for any CRNA student. Like ask any of them, that's just the norm. And that's just what happens. However, you really need to take time for yourself. This was hard for me because I would just go. Like if it needs to get done, I'll do it. I'd stay up till midnight, 1 a.m, studying. And I almost burned myself out. Like that's not healthy. Like you should not be studying like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. You should not do that. Take it from me. Don't. Because whenever you're getting tired, you're not retaining information and you just get frustrated and you keep trying, it's just not going to work. So take some time for yourself. Be generous, be gracious to yourself, be merciful to yourself, because you're going to need it. It's very challenging to try to manage the workload, but you also have to have some semblance of a normal life. Like, right, you have to eat, you have to drink, you have to spend some time with other people apart from your textbooks. That's just part of life. And you have to be willing to take time for yourself. And that looks different for really everybody. Like maybe you want to go read a book. Now, I will give you this caveat. You can't take time for yourself with something that takes like 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours a day. Like you don't have that kind of time. Like you can't go play a round of golf every single day. Like that's just not going to work. You have to be reasonable about it. Can you go to the coffee shop and sit and have a cup of coffee and read a book for an hour? Yes, that's very reasonable. Can you binge watch some TV? That's also very reasonable. Can you go on like a weekend trip? Also very reasonable. Now you have to be reasonable about this, right? If you have exams coming up, maybe it's not the best time to take all these breaks. Maybe you need to hammer it out for 3 days. And after your exam, take 2 or 3 days off. That's also very reasonable. You have to find what works for you, but you have to, and I repeat, you have to take time for yourself, because if you don't, you will burn out and you will just be in a much worse position than you were to start with. So take time for yourself, even if it's with a loved one, if it's with your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your sibling, whoever it is, a friend. Take some time for yourself, because you need a break as well. Even if you did poorly on an exam, even if you're so far behind, take some time, because when you take some time, you refresh, you recharge, you're going to be feeling ready to go, much more so than if you studied 12 hours straight and you're not retaining anything. I hope that makes sense. Okay. That's my soapbox. Now, what I wish I had known prior to CRNA school in the didactic portion: number 1, develop good study habits. Number 2, know your expenses. Number 3, know your peers and faculty. And number 4, take time for yourself. If you are a nurse anesthesia resident, comment below. Let me know what your tips are. What do you wish you had known prior to starting CRNA school in the didactic phase? And if any of you aspiring CRNAs out there have questions or concerns or anything to ask about our CRNA school journey, comment below. I would love to get in touch with you. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I will see you next time.
Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.